Okay, welcome everybody to the Tuesday, July 18th, 2017 meeting of Kubernetes SIG Service Catalog. We're continuing design discussions today about what's in scope for beta and what's not. I will go ahead and, would someone else like to share their screen and show the agenda and be the note taker? I am absolutely awful at talking and taking notes at the same time.
I'm happy to.
All right, fantastic.
Can anyone not see my screen?
I can see it.
A little on the small side.
Is that better, Doug?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first item on the agenda for today is orphan mitigation. So I am adding links to that into the agenda now. And what orphan mitigation refers to is basically error handling for situations where you provision an instance and the provision operation times out, as an example, and you're not certain whether it was actually completed at the broker or what. It's kind of in an indefinite state. And I think this also applies to updates, and there's facets that touch deletion too. I think that we should do this for beta because it's about ensuring that you don't have these orphaned instances or bindings that might incur a monetary charge or a resource usage that you don't intend. I think that the semantics of exactly what the right error handling are not super clear and not especially well defined in the spec. So I would definitely like to get agreement on what the semantics are in the API working group, but does anybody disagree in a vacuum that this seems to be a pretty central part of the spec? It's perhaps not given it as prominent treatment in the spec as it deserves currently, but I hope that we can change that as we make clarifications. It seems like by the decision plan to make open service broker API integration as solid as possible, that this would be something we'd want to have for beta. Any thoughts?
So I agree with hardening it up. Which aspect is fuzzy that we need to get clarity on or need to make a decision on?
Well, so right now in the spec, there's one table of HTTP response codes and scenarios where you have a timeout or you don't. That is sort of meant, it is treated as this is just what you look at to know what to do. But I don't think that it's universally applicable to all the resources that it applies to. I think there are cases where you'd want to treat a certain exit code or a certain HTTP status code that might be valid for an instance differently than the same status code that wouldn't be valid for a binding. So as an example, the status code for accepted is definitely one that's valid for operations on an instance if that instance supports or if the broker and the client support async operations. But right now, since we don't have asynchronous bindings, it's not valid for bindings. I think it would be great if we could wind up in a state where the orphan mitigation is defined separately for instances and bindings, and it's really specific so that you don't have to make inferences about what might be accepted and what might not be for a particular resource type.
So what do we need resolution on in the spec before we can make progress here, or do you think it's independent?
I think that Aaron has already started opening an issue for this to add some clarification. I would just like to get clarification on bindings. I think Aaron's issue and pull request has to do with clarifying it for instances. But Aaron, you probably remember better than I do. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. And Doug, it might have been you, requested to add at least specification for bindings as they currently are in master for orphan mitigation, specifically for bindings. Sorry.
Yeah.
So that might land on that PR. I think that's reasonable. And then we will deal with orphan mitigation for async bindings as we work through the async bindings PR as well.
Yeah, and that sounds familiar. I guess the point of my leading questions was to get to the point of what can we decide today for our stuff before we make any spec changes, and if there are decisions that we can make right now, what's the proposal being put forward?
So I view this situation basically as like, I think almost all of the details are probably encoded somewhere in the spec, but they need to be massaged a little bit, just like a number of other things have been. I don't think that there's any case where there's anything but, oh yeah, well for binding that one wouldn't be valid, but we kind of treated this as like the one place for everything. If we get the orphan mitigation behavior defined for instances separately for bindings and locate those things near the right portions of the spec, I think that's enough. It seems to me like it should be pretty cut and dry. I'd just like to get everything merged into the spec before we make additional changes for this.
Yeah, no, I apologize. I wasn't clear on my question. What I meant to ask is there anything we can do in the service catalog today before those spec changes go in?
Yeah, so one thing is that I already have a pull request open to stop retrying failure provision operations that the broker has said have failed, which is part of being compliant with the spec. I think that's pretty unambiguous. I was hoping that somebody else could go and do the same thing for bindings, and that will probably, I don't think either of those are controversial as things that we should do, and they move us in the direction of implementing the orphan mitigation. So there are definitely things that we can make progress on without having to have clarity on the spec.
Okay, so are there any open decision points then that we need to make right now?
Nope. I brought this up as an example of something that should be really easy to agree upon, but that I thought was significant enough that we should discuss it as a group in one of these meetings.
Yeah, I think, Paul, what you said about not retrying that sounds perfectly reasonable. For instances, otherwise known as provision on the OSB spec, I think it's reasonable also to try to do the delete in the follow-up PR to that. For bindings, I would say we should probably wait until that PR that I have gets merged. I'll have to add language to deal with binding orphan mitigation, and then until that PR gets accepted, I think that would be the right time to do the deletes on binding.
Yeah, so as a next immediate step that we could take on binding, I would suggest basically the equivalent of what I did for instances in the pull request that I have open, which is basically just to add a failure condition, and if the broker returns something that indicates a failure, to no longer retry the binding.
Yep, yeah, absolutely agree.
Okay, so I will add an issue specifically for that. And I am hoping that somebody would like to make that change. That would be a good one to make for somebody that hasn't made as many code changes as myself, which, if I remember, is everyone. So just in terms of growing the pool of people that can make the API changes, that one's pretty cut and dry. That would be a good one to make for somebody. Okay, does that conclude does that capture everything for that one? I think it does.
So I think everything is captured in those notes. Paul, can you put the binding issue into Slack when it's up?
Yeah, I started typing it, and once we're done with this meeting, I'll wrap that one up and I'll put it in the channel.
Sure. Yeah, whenever.
Okay. All right. So next up, it looks like Doug has an item on there about renaming binding. So in case folks haven't seen the meeting where we discussed this, we definitely need to rename binding because when you use because there is a resource in the Kubernetes v1 API called binding that the scheduler uses to make assignments of pods to nodes. And so when you're running behind the aggregator and you use kubectl to try to address a binding, you get a naming collision, and you have to use the fully qualified name of the resource, which is kind of cumbersome. So we definitely need to change the name. I am very happy to spend a few minutes talking about what the name might be. Doug, I think you've got some opinions on that. I've been thinking about it a little bit. If we do that, I think that we should try to time box that to like maybe 5 to 10 minutes because naming discussions tend to be a strange attractor and more difficult to agree on than ordering pizza. So if people are okay time boxing it maybe to 10 minutes, we can definitely talk about that now.
So real quick, I put into this document, per yesterday's meeting, there is a larger scope issue now for general guidance on how to name resources. I think that it's just worth mentioning, but it's not worth coupling that issue or that decision to this decision any more than just writing it in here.
Okay, so following on from yesterday's discussion, or I guess I should say agreement to prefix everything with service catalog, my proposal for this was service catalog key because that's consistent with what Cloud Foundry calls these resources. I believe Nail put in a proposal for, I want to say instance secret key, or I'm sorry, I have to go look it up. He had a different proposal.
So,
instance access key was his proposal, but so I guess it'd be service catalog instance access key. I don't have a huge preference, other than I do have I have a slight preference towards just service catalog key for consistency with Cloud Foundry, but other than that, I don't really care. It's too much.
So if I remember correctly, the service key in Cloud Foundry is what you use when you use a user provided service. I think
no, it's not. No,
can you provide a pointer to the doc? Would you be willing to do that? That describes what a service key is? Because I don't think that's part of the spec at all. Like I have not seen the phrase service key that I remember being in the spec.
I'm sorry, I'm on mute. No, it's not part of the spec. It's part of Cloud Foundry. If you look at the link I just pasted in there, service keys are basically your way of saying, I create an instance, all I need are the credentials. So basically, it's kind of like doing the binding operation without linking it to an app. In fact, you can also see it through the Cloud Foundry command line. If you just do the help and look for service key, service key, you'll see it in there as well.
In true GitHub fashion, the link that you made to the comment opened a completely random part of the issue for the pull request.
Oh, wait, no, wait. Look at the link in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Sorry if I said the wrong thing. That should take you to the Cloud Foundry documentation for service key. And in particular, if you want to see what it looks like in the command line, here's the sample command line that pasted into the chat as well.
So how is this implemented in Cloud Foundry? Does it use a binding?
Yeah, I mean, basically the open source broker API call is to create a binding, just don't provide the, the app ID stuff.
Okay. I gotta say, I think service key is not a name that anybody is gonna understand what it means, and I don't necessarily think that making things consistent with Cloud Foundry is a goal. I'll consider it. I'm not saying no, but I would like to learn more about it.
Like I said, I don't really care that much about what it's called, other than I have a slight preference for this because there's precedent. But two, I need a concrete proposal for an alternative. Everybody says they're not thrilled with it, but I haven't yet to hear very many alternatives aside from nails.
Well,
I would just say either maybe we can just keep it to let's decide between this and Niels. I think that's the only way we're going to get through this in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, here's what Niels is. Hold on, service catalog. That's what his proposal is versus. So I think those are the two proposals being put forward so far.
So here's another one, which is I worry that since we tend to explain the Open Service Broker API in the same context as we explain the Kubernetes API for catalog, that I am worried if we say, oh, and then there's this bind operation in the Service Broker API that, and in the same breath we say, and it's called service key in Kubernetes, that it will be confusing. I don't know.
Well, keep in mind one thing, Paul. I think, well, what you said is true. That right now we do end up discussing sort of the Kubernetes resources and the Service Broker API to people because we're telling them about the Open Service Broker API. I think for this particular issue, we need to look at it from an Kubernetes end user's point of view, where they're not really going to know or care about the Open Source Broker API, because it's almost an implementation detail. I think the most important thing here is to come up with a word that matches a Kubernetes user's expectation and means something to them, not necessarily for Open Source Broker API.
Yeah,
so
I agree with
speak
you.
to that a little bit. I've done this explanation independently from OSB quite a few times. I haven't tried to explain things with another name besides binding, obviously, because that's what it's called right now. But the way that I've explained it is when you create an instance, that creates an instance of the service. When you create a binding, that is what allows you to access that instance of the service. Now, let's say I went and started trying to explain service catalog key, what I would probably say is when you create a service catalog key, that returns to you all of the data that you need, the credentials and coordinates that you need to access the instance. So really what it would be about if we use service catalog key is getting people to just memorize a term instead of trying to get them to make sense of it in the context of the Kubernetes resource set.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So I think instance credentials could definitely be one. I think I like instance credentials better than key because key is very hard to reason about what that might be in a vacuum, right? And if you say instance credentials, that's a little bit more descriptive. Let me be that guy and offer another complication, which is that I think long term, we've kind of diminished the extent to which we've talked about this, but we usually when we were starting this SIG, we had talked about it being important to be able to manifest the different parts of the bind response into the appropriate Kubernetes primitives so that you could put config into a config map, credentials into a secret, and maybe make a service with that fronted the coordinates that you got back. I still think that would be good to do at the very least for for config maps and secrets to differentiate them. So that might be something to think about with regard to naming this resource. And Jessica has also pointed out that generally Kubernetes kind names are singular, although I think endpoints is the exception to that.
So I'm okay with dropping the S on credentials. I actually think credential makes more sense, even though it sounds a little, or I'm sorry, it sounds a little hard to say. But Aaron, I wanted to point out one thing though. I suspect in most of your conversations, using the word binding up until now probably just seemed to make a whole lot of sense. Imagine in the future when you have to explain to somebody that they may have to create a binding resource and then a pod preset binding resource as well. I think the word binding being in places might actually be really confusing because only one of them is actually binding.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Doug about this, since I definitely view the long-term thing that we'll converge upon to be there's a resource that represents the open service broker part of the bind operation, and then there might be any number of resources that govern the consumption of that binding in Kubernetes, like pod preset. I could easily see another resource that built a VCAP services environment variable. I could see another one that did an Istio rule. I could see another one that did a network policy rule. So I imagine that we'll probably wind up with N other resources that it might be easier to avoid the use of the term binding, actually, now that I think about it. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, so
Naming
Doug,
stuff is hard.
To your point, yeah, I mean, that would, it's doable still, but it would get harder. But so all that I was illustrating there is that to date, I've had this same tutorial session / discussion, I would say between 10 and 15 times with everyone from people who are hardcore CF users to people brand new to Kubernetes and never used CF before. Most of these people are Microsoft engineers. Some of them are PMs, but they're all Microsoft people. So what I was trying to illustrate there is I use binding independently from the OSB / CF binding concept. And in fact, with the Cloud Foundry hardcore people, I take great pain to separate the Kubernetes binding concept from the CF binding concept for a couple of different reasons. But if we changed over to something else, I just want to illustrate that I would still prefer that we keep it separate from CF. So if we use service catalog key, it would just be a matter of separating it from the CF key concept and then getting them to memorize what it means. If it's something that is more semantically meaningful, then I would just focus on getting them to understand what the semantic meaning of it is, and then they understand it at that point.
So
I'm not too worried about the specific name, as long as it's something that makes a reasonable amount of sense. You know, not gobbledygook or foo or something like that.
I tell you what, let's call time on this one for now. And we have another meeting set up tomorrow. I think we could easily talk for 30 more minutes about this, but there are other
Paul,
things to get through.
We talked about this for like 15 to 20 at least minutes yesterday, and I think it's time to just like make a decision on this, so that we don't like have another 30 minutes tomorrow and then probably another 30 minutes on Friday and so on.
Okay, that sounds fine to me, with the knowledge that this is also eventually subject to API approval, so we'll probably reassess the name at that point anyway. At least it's possible. My own vote, I think, would be for service catalog instance credential.
I'll +1 that.
I'm okay with it too.
Imagine that. Doug is okay with his own suggestion.
Well, no. In fairness, my original one was just key. I was trying to move to here based on the words of the group.
Okay, I'm not hearing any -1s, and has the form of a true compromise, since I think everybody is likely to be equally unhappy about the name, since it's a hard name to think of.
So service catalog instance credential, correct?
That's the one.
Cool. Not plural.
Not plural.
I automatically put the S in there.
That's the one problem with the name that I have. Yes, I'm going to continue to put an S on it.
Well, so I will say to move the discussion, I think, to the next point, kind of. Let me just say this: as far as use cases go, one of our main use cases is with Helm, and these things would thus be packaged up into Helm charts. And if it's service catalog instance credential, that's what it would just be hard coded as in the Helm chart. So I think this is reasonable from my perspective. That's what I'll leave it as. EOF from me.
Okie dokes. So, Doug, since you made, I think, at least one or two issues, would you take the action item to record our consensus?
Yep.
And as part of that, can we make sure there is only one issue open for this? Because I think we have at least two, and I know there's been one that I already closed about renaming binding. So I don't care which one, as long as there's just one at the end.
Whatever. Yeah. Okay. For the record, I blame Aaron for the other one. But yeah. Okay.
I've probably submitted at least two issues myself. So sorry all.
And the one we reopened yesterday was a group reopen. So there you go.
But Doug, to be fair, I did push today to put this to bed.
I appreciate that.
As promised.
So, yes, I appreciate that.
Okay, so next up is secret key format versus JSON property names. I don't know what this refers to. Is this about putting separating individual keys into secret keys, or individual parts of the bind response into secret keys?
Yeah, I suspect so. Nail isn't on the call, so we can't be for sure. But I think it probably is related to the discussion that we were having yesterday through either an issue or Slack, I can't remember which one, where not all JSON key names can be valid environment variable names or Kubernetes config map names or keys. And so the question is, what are we going to do about that? That's the top level issue.
Okay, so I have made an issue to consider a mode for that results in a secret being created with a single key that has the entire content of the response. For cases like, I know that that at least the IBM contingent is interested in making a VCAP services equivalent, or implementing VCAP services for Kubernetes, and I think that's a valid use case. And I think if there's a mode where you can just say, hey, dump everything into this secret key, that is probably going to make implementing VCAP services a lot easier.
So your proposal...
Sorry,
sorry, you go.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so your proposal was for specifically the credentials secret, but I think that this discussion was started based off of the secret for secret parameters for the instance spec. So would that apply in this case as well? You'd be able to specify either or what's the thinking there?
The thinking is that I want to talk about them as separate things because they're different, and I'm very happy to talk about that one too. But let's constrain this part of the discussion just to putting the bind result into a thing, and we can talk about parameters separately.
Paul, I think this is the latter and not the former.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and sorry I beefed it up, everybody.
No worries.
All right, so can we get a more descriptive title on this section then, and I will make another I will append something to the end of the agenda today.
So this is for JSON property names in instance parameter secrets. Is that correct, Jessica?
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity,
And bind parameters eventually. It applies to both.
Yeah. Okay.
The ones you send, not the ones you get back.
just out of curiosity, do we really want different solutions for these two? Because in both cases, are we basically taking a JSON blob and trying to stick it into keys?
So, Doug, we do care on the ones that come back because where possible, we would want the secret exploded out and not buried under an object because of how cubes inf from stuff works. It makes things much easier to inject into the pod.
Oh,
I thought we just decided that we were talking about secret parameters only.
Scope.
So are we talking about secret parameters now, or are we talking about bind results and where they go?
I was just asking for clarification on why we're necessarily treating these as separate things.
They are different.
I think there are pretty different use cases here. One case is how does your app consume? That would be what's at the bottom of today's agenda. The other is how does service catalog consume the stuff you want to send to it, which would be the bullet we're on now.
Yeah.
So I think it seems wise to consider this first and then see what we can take from this and apply, if anything, to what's at the bottom of today's agenda. Does anyone disagree with that?
No, that's fine. I think that there are probably also two different modes, right? Like if you want the control as someone that is sending parameters to just send, to have explicit control over the JSON, then there might be a case where you could reference a single key and take whatever's in that key and send that as the body. I think there's another case which is probably closer to what folks that are building forms that will collect parameters would want to send, which would be that you might specify a group of secret keys or a list of secret keys and synthesize a body that includes those as a JSON dictionary. Does anybody have a case for something in between?
I would be fine with that either or.
I apologize. This is probably a really stupid question, but I'm still confused about which issue we're talking about. I'm reading the text there on the screen, and it's confusing me. Is this talking about taking a secret and using that as parameters to instance create and a binding create?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the issue there? Because my understanding is that those keys are a subset of what JSON allows. So what's the issue?
It sounds to me like the issue is that Nal has a use case where he wants to be able to send a key that is not a valid config map or secret key.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you very much for clarifying. Okay, got it.
So I would say, like, in that case, that if Null was able to say, here's the body that I want you to send, it's in this particular secret key, or possibly a config map key, that would enable that use case. And I definitely think that almost everybody else, and please correct me if this is an invalid assumption, but I would imagine that most people that are thinking of using this would want to reference individual secret keys, or say, take this secret and all the keys in it are parameters, and make a dictionary that is the keys and their values and send that as the body. For the
I don't know, Paul. I'd actually argue that that's harder because we've got to convert something that's in JSON schema format, which is a simple key map, to a secret format, which is not, right? Secrets, the content is stored when you create it, usually as data string or data text or whatever it is, right? So you're making the client do a conversion to a valid secret object.
I'm not sure what the entanglement is for the schema.
So automatically generated schema stuff that we're using, right? The forms that are built off of the schema.
Mm-hmm.
The output you get from that is the JSON object.
Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting to know.
It's the exact thing that we would send to the broker effectively.
Yeah. I would say from a client perspective, and we can do different things. This is Sam Padgett from my head, by the way. From a client, like the easiest thing for us is just to have a secret and have, the key be something like parameters and the value just be the JSON below. That's super easy for us. Anything else requires us to like map the data to some other format. Like we can do it the other way. And I have a prototype that does it the other way, but we ran into this specific issue, right, where the secret keys didn't allow some of the values that were in the parameter names, and it's the broker who chooses what the parameter object names are. So, we're kind of stuck.
Okay. So does anybody especially want the ability to reference individual secret keys to create the parameters?
Probably not if you're going to be creating the secret for the purpose of using it for the service broker. My concern is somebody who already has a pre-existing secret and then wants to send that along to a broker. I guess the constraint there is to say, well, that's fine, but because you're using the secret for some other purpose, probably you may not be able to get the names that the broker needs. So it's up to you to do some kind of mapping into a brand new secret. Is that the solution for them?
Which slide are you talking about?
So, Doug, I don't disagree with you at all, and I think we could totally do both of these. I think the specific problem that we're trying to solve, which we should keep in mind, is what are we going to do for beta, knowing that we can add additional modes or additional flexibility in a later release. So maybe this is like we are trying to find the 80% use case, and we can do the other 20% as we have somebody that can point to a specific use case that they have.
No, to be clear, I wasn't pushing back on it at all. I want to make sure that that is the answer that we give to people that if they come up with that scenario. We say, sorry, you're going to have to do some of your own mapping.
Okay. So yeah, I would say if we decided to go with that, that would be the answer. And we could also say, if you need more flexibility in doing this, I would love to have an issue with a specific use case created in Catalog so that we could consider what the right API is to build for people that offers more flexibility.
Right.
So sorry, this is a dumb question. I think maybe I'm not following 100%. So if we give people the ability to send a secret in, and all the keys of the secret get transformed into JSON and get sent to the broker, that, as we said already, that has the problem of not being able to send the entire set of possible JSON keys. So Paul, are you saying that that's okay as the 80% in your mind?
So I would say that, like, it sounds to me like the 80% would be that, well, before I tell you what I think the 80% is, I think this is a case where there will probably be like a couple different types of things that people will want to do. And I think that when we talk about the 80%, we should think of this as like the first of potentially n different siblings. So I would say the 80%, based on what it sounds like to me right now, is that we could have a mode field or type field for the parameters, and that it would have one valid value at first, which we could default as being you identify a single secret and key that holds the entire body of or it holds the entire set of parameters that we'll send.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then as we find we get enough feedback from users that we feel like, okay, well, we've got some interesting feedback. We've got several different examples of things people want to do. Let's figure out how to add one or more additional modes to do those. We can do those in a backward compatible manner.
Yeah, I'm on a Mac too, so
I'm cool with that.
I'm a little nervous about this mode thing, only because I'm worried about it. It seems like it may be a lot of extra work for users. Maybe we can fix it by just having smart defaults on mode. I'm wondering if there's some way we can get around it. And this is just a random idea. If it doesn't sound good, that's fine. But could we not infer the mode based upon whether they use a predefined property name versus not using that property name? Like, let's say service catalog parameters or something like that, where if that is there, it has to be the only one there, and therefore it has to have the single blob.
We could do that. So that's actually similar to how the API for volumes is constructed, where there's basically a volume source type, which is a union of n other types, and those types are inlined so that, like, as a user, when you go to write a YAML, you just say, give me an AWS EBS volume, or give me a GCE persistent disk volume, or an iSCSI, raw iSCSI volume, and you can only specify one of those per volume definition, but you don't have to have an explicit mode field.
If we could do something like that, it might make me feel better, but I may hate it once we see it, but I prefer to head down that path at first.
Okay, yeah, I am happy to type up this construction that I have in mind that would basically be like a union type that we add to instance or binding, or both, I guess.
Oh, maybe I wasn't clear. I was actually wondering whether we could just say, if you define your secret with a single key of this special name, then our logic knows what to do with it. It's a single blob. If there's anything else in there, then it treats it as real property names and just copies it verbatim, every single one of them.
I don't have a knee-jerk reaction against that, but I'd need to think about it a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of funky, so we definitely need to think about it, but it would remove the need for a mode and other special logic on the binding or whatever we call that thing. Or the instance binding, I should say.
So as a first cut, we're all in agreement that we're okay with doing the just giant JSON blob with a key, and then we can implement the sort of logic behind the alternative case later.
I am okay with that. So I may be dumb here. I wrote this action item basically, Paul, that you're going to write up a proposal for this mode idea. I don't think that I quite fully understand it, so I hope that I wrote down like an appropriately vague action item here.
It is sufficiently vague and opaque as to the true meaning of this.
Great. So that I don't sign you up for something you're not intending on. Okay.
By the way, this is reminding me, I have been uploading the design meetings to YouTube. So know that they're up there if anybody has missed one. And I have been thinking that we should email the list whenever there's a new upload. So I will begin doing that. Okay, sounds like we're done on that specific thing. Next one, Aaron, handling deletes to instances that have bindings to them.
Yep. This has been an open question for some time now. The basic of it is, what do we do if someone tries to kubectl delete an instance where there's one or more bindings that references that instance? If you look at the first prior discussion link, yeah, that's part of issue number 801. what we originally decided on, or I shouldn't say decided on, what we originally discussed in the last face-to-face meeting we had was to somehow pass a force flag to kubectl such that if you kubectl an instance and it has bindings on it, it would fail. And if you kubectl force delete it, then it would just automatically cascade delete all the bindings.
So before we go doing something special and one-off here, have you guys looked at the garbage collection stuff?
Oh, I have. I'm just going over just like the prior discussion. So I don't necessarily think that either one of those is the right way to go. But Jessica, to your point, maybe do you want to describe how garbage collection might solve this? Because I don't really have a much better idea than that.
Yeah, so basically when you're doing garbage collection on the server, what we've switched to in our own console for end users is by default, well, we do something called foreground deletion. Foreground deletion says, delete me, but first go delete anything that I own. So in this case, you would say foreground delete the instance, and then that would go and delete all of the bindings, assuming that the bindings had owner references back to their service instance, which is what we would probably want to do. And the force mode is what's called an orphan delete. So when you go to do kube control, there's a -- cascade equals false option, and that automatically attempts to do an orphan garbage collection delete. And that says, I don't care that there are things that say that I own them. I'm going to delete me immediately. These other things are just going to be left around. You'll have to clean them up on your own. There's actually a third option, which is kind of weird, which is called background deletion. And that says, delete me now, and then in the background, go up and clean up everything else.
Does that mean in the first case that you mentioned, I guess it's called the foreground one, that the I guess it's the HTTP delete will not return until it deletes all of the children?
It returns immediately. It marks the object with a deletion timestamp, which is how you know it's been accepted. And it adds a list of finalizers to the metadata part of the object. And you'll see there's a foreground something. I can't remember what it's called.
Does the garbage collector remove one of those finalizers when it finishes doing the other deletes?
Exactly. Yep. The same thing happens with Orphan. You'll see an Orphan finalizer appear.
So what's that in background? How does the background work differently under the covers?
So background immediately deletes the object and then goes off and deletes the other thing. Foreground marks the object as deleted, but does not delete it from storage. So it still exists in storage. You can still get it. It's just marked as being deleted.
Interesting. So
and we have to use that mode because we rely on finalizers to do unbinds and deprovision.
Yeah, so foreground deletion is what we were kind of abstractly calling force delete back in the day when we were at this face-to-face thing.
Yep. Now let me be that guy again and add a couple wrinkles. Which the first one is that aggregated APIs do not are not supported for this type of garbage collection in 1.7.
Yet. They're not supported yet.
Not supported yet, but not supported right now. And if I remember correctly, the behavior of Cloud Foundry is that if you have active bindings, or if you have bindings to an instance and you try to deprovision that instance, that it will block you. But I don't think there's any precedent anywhere in the API for a resource that you cannot delete sometimes. So I think that we have to be able to accept the delete. I don't think we can block the actual HTTP deletion. If we wanted to do something like that, we might have to make the semantics such that like you can delete it, but then you have to go and manually delete the bindings before the instance will be deprovisioned. But I don't think that's a great experience. Probably one that would be more similar to how things work in Kubernetes is one where your bindings would get garbage collected and we'd accept the delete, garbage collect the bindings, unbind them, and then do the deprovision.
So basically, I wrote a really brief proposal in issue 820 that says there is a new field on the spec that defaults to just failing. So accepting the delete and then writing a status in the instance that says can't delete, there are bindings open. And if you set that field to, I think I called it cascade something, like cascade binding delete or something along those lines, then essentially our controller would implement foreground deletion, which is what, again, that was what I have referred to in the past as forced delete.
So this is a convenient timing for this discussion because SIG API machinery is meeting tomorrow, and I plan to attend that meeting and find out what the status of garbage collection support for aggregated APIs is.
So I'm not sure why. So do we absolutely need garbage collection in order to implement foreground delete in our controller?
That's like foreground deletion relies upon garbage collection.
Okay. So if our controller, now tell me if this is a stupid idea, to have our controller get the delete event, see the deletion timestamp set on the instance, see the finalizers, and then traverse to all the bindings that reference the instance, unbind each of them, delete each of them, and then finally delete the instance, effectively implementing the garbage collection itself.
Yeah, so if we thought that we would, if garbage collection wasn't a thing, we'd have to go and do that. If I go to API machinery and anybody else, obviously welcome to join me and say, when is it going to happen? And they're like, oh, well, it's funny you asked because the pull request was just merged and the cherry pick is in progress right now. I might say, okay, let's not do that. I think it kind of depends on what the remaining time until we can get it from the core is.
Okay. So maybe, does anyone disagree with putting an action item on here of getting the status of garbage collection from API machinery tomorrow and then revisiting this next design meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not hearing any disagreement, so I'll put that down.
Sweet. Well, I think that with 2 minutes and some change remaining, we probably don't have time to talk about the binding mode thing. I will bump that to the spot on the agenda for tomorrow. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and see you on the internet. See you same time tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to wave goodbye now and stop recording. Thanks everybody for coming and watching and so forth. See you soon.